let's dive right into the demo. I'm going to go ahead and bring up PaperSave, right? So at this point, you are seeing PaperSave. If this is the first time seeing PaperSave, welcome, right? What you're seeing on the screen is what we provide to all of our clients. Gives users a central spot to access anything that is PaperSave related. This site may look different depending on users' permissions in the environment. I am an administrator, so I get access to everything and everything. But just note that PaperSave is very user specific. So users only get access to whatever you provide them access to within the environment. What we're going to dive into first is our workflow process, right? So what you're seeing here is what a reviewer or an approver would be looking at when an invoice is assigned to them, right? Now we'll dive into what you see here in greater detail, right? But many different ways to get those documents into the system. You can scan them in, you can use and attach in the event that you have some documents laying around somewhere that you want to bring into the system. But a lot of our clients use our capabilities to monitor emails, right? Most of our vendors nowadays have the capabilities of sending invoices through email. PaperSave can plug in into numerous emails to be able to grab those attachments right from the emails and bring those into our process, right? So in essence, automating how those documents come into the environment. You always have the capabilities of scanning, bringing something virtual in, and also using an email or an inbox of an email to bring data into PaperSave. We don't restrict what you use, right? You can use all three of those options at the same time, depending on how you're getting your documents, right? Also worth mentioning, we don't restrict how many emails PaperSave can monitor. We can connect to numerous emails at the same time and bring in documents from those emails into our PaperSave workflows. Now, what you'll see next is part of our automation, right? Normally, this is not something that users see. This is something that runs in the back end. But I want to call out to attention to our OCR process here, right? Our automation, our artificial intelligence in OCR. So the vision is, as PaperSave grabs your documents from a scanner, from an email, however you get those into the system, we're going to run, right, our OCR engine as soon as those documents are presented to PaperSave, right? So this actually runs in the back end before users even see this, right? So we grab a document from a scanner, from an email. We're going to give those documents to our automation first. We're going to run OCR, in essence, help you code those invoices or constituents donations, because you'll see that here in just a second as well. Couple of things to note here, right? Way OCR works is we look at the address, we are connected to Blackbaud, and we match that address to an address that you have on the vendor card, right? So we have that native integration. And again, that's PaperSave showcasing that native integration, because we're literally reading from the invoice and now connected to your vendor table inside of Blackbaud and expected to make a match on that address, in essence, giving you the vendor. After that, we're going to pull basic information like the amount, right? What's the amount on that invoice? What the invoice number is, what the invoice date is, right? Then again, PaperSave always looks into Blackbaud for that true sense of data, right? That truth. So we're going to go into that vendor card and we're going to see if you have any of those defaults at the vendor level, right? For example, again, we talked about those payment terms. We talked about GL account information, right? Expense accounts, right? You have that information defaulted at a vendor level. We're going to be able to pull that right from the vendor card itself. Note, it's not something that, maybe you don't have those configured just yet, right? Which is perfectly fine. This is something that PaperSave is configured to do, whether you have that there now or not. We encourage you to leverage those default values from the vendor card. If you do not have them there now, you can always add them on a later time and they will just start being picked up by our systems, right? So just know that is an option there. These percent signs that you're seeing here, right? That is how accurate OCR believes that it finds the right information out of your invoices. So you also get a sense of how OCR is doing well when finding data, right? So any vendor information needs to be adjusted or anything like that, you'll kind of see what OCR is finding and how confident we are in finding that data, right? Now, again, note, you don't see this all the time, right? This is all running in the back end. We grab something from an email from your scanner, and then we place those into the workflow. And this is actually where your users will start to work within PaperSave to review, approve, and even create those records inside of Blackbaud, right? Couple of things. What a workflow does, that is a business process, right? So right now, documents can be placed into a workflow. How they get escalated for an approval, if there's even an approval needed, that is entirely up to how you do business, right? What dictates an invoice to be sent to another person to have those reviews or even possibly check the coding of that invoice, right? So that's ultimately what we'll walk through here. Documents get placed into a workflow, and then we execute your business processes. Note that there's options here for PaperSave to route invoices automatically, right? Again, bringing in that automation into the process. You saw PaperSave pull defaults from the vendor card. Well, if you tell us that a certain segment of the GL equals a certain department or a certain user inside of your organization, well, we can segment that GL account and use those first 3 digits or those last 2 digits or whatever the case may be to send an invoice to a department or even to a user, right? Vendor ownership. We can do vendor ownership routing as soon as OCR determines who that vendor is. Maybe industry business solution is always handled by Julio or always handled by Tammy, right? As soon as we determine who that vendor is, it gets automatically assigned to that user. So just note that if PaperSave knows what the rhyme or reason is for those routing rules, and there's values that we can lean on to make sure that we can always verify that those rules are being followed, we can automate a lot of your business processes and let your team members know that, hey, there's work to do in PaperSave by also sending them notifications. So your users will be able to receive notifications like the ones you see on the screen here, right? So PaperSave can reach out as soon as a user receives a lot of invoices or even one invoice to review or approve. We can be proactive and send that user an email letting them know that, hey, there's work for you to do in PaperSave. They click on web, they go right into the system to approve those invoices firsthand. And just know, if you do end up having approvers and reviewers that are out on the field, we do have mobile device capabilities, right? So they can download our application right onto their mobile device and be able to approve invoices while they're on the go. Right? So always being able to keep those invoices moving forward in the approval process. All right, so let's talk about approving an invoice. A couple of ways to do this, right? That, let's say, AP review person, right? They get a load of invoices. They now have to review those and possibly send those for an approval. They get to click on that first invoice. They get to see that document, and they also get to see what PaperSave captured as coding, right? Depending on permissions in the environment, some users may have the capabilities of updating this code, right? Maybe I want to update the distribution. Double click on that row. You'll be able to update distribution or even add a new line item to the distribution if you needed to, right? But this is all controlled by security, right? It's not going to be a free for all that anybody and everybody's going to be able to change coding on your invoices, right? This is all based on security. Maybe the approvers, all they do is review, make sure that this doesn't look correct, and they reject or approve depending on what that coding is. If this is rejected, it can potentially go back to that AP review person so that they can make some coding corrections based on their recommendations, right? It all depends on how you do things, right? But just know that there's some options here where these fields potentially are restricted based on your permissions. On the top here, you have options to modify the document, which again, security protected. Click on add, yes, and I can add more pages to this invoice. This is a one-pager example. Most likely your invoices won't be. They're going to be multiple pages. So you're going to see primary page and all of your supporting documents to the right of that primary page, right? But in the event that it is a one-pager and you get a supporting document or something like that that should live with this document, just know that you can modify it where it lives. Also, annotations on the left-hand side that you can use to maybe highlight some values for someone. Maybe you want to add a note for somebody if you like. Or, very important, maybe there's some sensitive information on these documents that you don't want to capture in a document management software, right? You also have the capabilities of using redaction. Now, just know that out of everything that I've put on the screen, redaction is permanent. If I put redaction on something, you cannot undo. You save a copy, share a copy, it's going to be redacted. Okay. All right. So let's send this for a review so that you can see how that is done. So there is a field here for you to add reviewer or reviewers, right? Maybe you want to have this document be seen by a group of folks, right? So you can add a list of reviewers here so that we go down that list and send this invoice where you assigned as a reviewer from this list. Again, just note that, as I mentioned, we can automate this process and add a reviewer there automatically if we know what the rhyme or reason is. Click on add, type in a couple of letters, and you get suggestions made on what's been configured, right? Save, now you've added a reviewer, right? You send for review. Duplicate detection, right? So PaperSave also does validation for you, right? So if the distribution, for example, doesn't match the invoice amount, if the invoice is something that has been seen by PaperSave before, we're gonna let you know, right? So we're gonna raise our hands and let you know that, hey, this invoice has been seen in PaperSave, allow you to make any type of corrections. Not only when the invoice is picked up by OCR, but even if a user happens to change that invoice number and they tab out of that field, we're going to check for duplications as well. Just note that I am an administrator, so I can do that, so I can move this invoice forward. In most cases, this would be grayed out for some users and they wouldn't be able to make changes. They would be able to address it by sending it to the AP processor or sending it to an administrator to double check to make sure that it is a duplicate, and they can handle that as all right. Once you click on review, that invoice does go away. The next one comes up on the list. Just one of the ways to do this. We have a lot of clients that like to add a reviewer and go to the next and add a reviewer and continue to go on and add all of that data, right? Review that whole batch. You are able to select that whole batch and send that to multiple different reviewers at once, right? So again, multiple different ways to do this depending on how comfortable you get with the software and what is your preference there. Bruno receives an email, right? We just routed something to a reviewer. I'm going to be playing a little bit of multiple hats here. Here is our newest invoice. We're just going to review this one. Now, Bruno, again, has some options here whether he wants to approve or reject that invoice. Note, you cannot reject an invoice without having some sort of details as to why you're rejecting. So no longer will you get an invoice sent back to you with very minimal information. Somebody's got to tell you why this is being rejected, right? On approval, comments are not necessarily required, but we can make them required at any stage. It's entirely up to the business process there. This is a good invoice. Sign that as Bruno, right? Bruno's going to click approve. So we talked about business rules, right? Anytime somebody clicks approve, right? Anytime those approvers are clicking approve, what we're doing is checking those approvers as rules to make sure, hey, can that approver approve that invoice based on the dollar amount or whatever that logic may be in the environment, right? Here, Bruno clicked approve on an invoice and it got automatically escalated. Reason being is that dollar amount exceeded Bruno's threshold, right? That is, again, something that we can configure is dollar amount thresholds. Bruno can only approve something up to $100. Above that, he reports to Larry. Larry got the invoice automatically because it exceeded Bruno's authority. This is good. Sign that as Larry Hartley. He clicks approve. And we continue to do that check, right? We're going to continue to verify to make sure that the right people are seeing those invoices, that we're following your business processes. At the end of that process, at the end of that approval process, right, we're going to put all of your invoices into a last final step, potentially, right? It's called a submit to financial edge step, right? This is where PaperSave gives you the ability to review the batch that has been approved and create those invoices inside of FE whenever you're ready to do so, right? We can automate that process if you wanted us to. Most clients like to have that buffer, right? So they can maybe look at due dates, look at post dates, right? Look at all that payment term information. You have the capabilities of restricting what fields you see here so that you get data that is relevant to what's needed very quickly. So you can hide some of these fields if they're not relevant, but ultimately you get to choose when those invoices are created inside of. Open up that invoice, right? This is the one we just worked. Bottom left corner. Here's your audit trail, right? So we are building an audit trail as your users are approving invoices. Here, you'll see comments from those users and approvers, right? So as they enter comments here on the right-hand side, they will show up here, right? And you can also add a little bit of a personal touch and add their pictures right next to their comments if you like, right? Next tab over, you'll see a more in-depth detail as to what's happening in that workflow, right? So who's approved the invoice, really, right? Because this invoice was owned by Tammy. She was my AP person, but Julio came in here and approved that invoice, right? So this actually shows you the accountability, who's actually doing the work. Maybe somebody was out of the office or whatever the case may be, and maybe the administrator is doing all of that good work. That is all being documented, which you can also download out of PaperSave and produce to auditors if you ever needed it, right? You do have the submit button here, right? This will send the invoice right into Blackbaud for us, right? But you can do this on a onesie basis, or again, if you have a whole batch of 10, 20, 30, whatever it is, and you're comfortable, you've already reviewed that whole batch and you want to send them all into Blackbaud, you can do that as well. It's entirely up to you, okay? I'm gonna grab the one, click on send, document is gone, it's now being sent into Blackbaud. Now, it is a direct connection between PaperSave and Blackbaud, right? So from the moment that you click submit to the moment that that invoice shows up in Blackbaud, we're talking about seconds, right? So if we go into Blackbaud here, payables, invoice, I am going to search for my new, click on search. Now, the only reason this invoice wouldn't be in PaperSave, that is if there was any kind of coding issues, right? So we do have to follow the rules that Blackbaud has in place, right? So if maybe you're sending an invoice that is past the posting period, then that invoice would reject. But again, here is our invoice, and within a matter of seconds, those invoices should be in the system, right? And again, you can send multiple at once, is entirely up to you, but this is what we create in the environment, right? So we create the actual invoice for you, pass all of that coding information distribution, and we also associate a copy of that document right alongside of the record, right? So if you've never seen PaperSave inside of Blackbaud, again, this is our native integration, right? So that's what we call about, that's what we mean by saying PaperSave is natively integrated into Blackbaud is we're just another native tile, right? You go into a record, you go into a vendor, you go into a deposit, you go into a constituent, you go into a fund, you're going to find a PaperSave tile there, which will have a copy of your documents right alongside of it, right? Double click on that document, that brings the record right up. You get to see your invoice, bottom left corner, you still get that audit trail, right? So you get to see the full audit trail. It's just now has grown. This is where we saw it last. This is Blackbaud confirming that we've created the invoice successfully, right? Now, everything that you see on the screen here, right, is now searchable for you, right? Literally anything and everything. So you can search by something that is written on the document. All of these profile fields here that we used to maybe route your invoice, to create the invoice inside of Blackbaud. All of that data is now searchable, right? And I'll show you how we do that here in a little bit. But just know that all of this information is now easily accessible once it is in PaperSave. If we go back to our workflows, right? I mentioned from a management standpoint, you now have a new process in place. We are automating that AP process. You want to see where everything is at right now. That is what our dashboards are here for, right? We talked a little bit about dashboards at the start, but active invoices. So that's ultimately what you're seeing on the screen, right? This is a dashboard that is going to reflect the data that is inside of that workflow, right? So it's going to show you how many outstanding invoices you have, what the monies look like, outstanding items by due dates, right? So how old these items are getting, right? You see how old and they're getting, vendors that require immediate attention. You can see where in the process these invoices could be. You can also turn a switch on and see who is owning these invoices in that process, right? Now, what I really like about this is it's not a graph just to be a graph. I want to see all of these invoices that Tammy's holding. I want to see all of these that Jane is holding, right? I can simply just click on that graph and it's going to take me right into my workflow so that I can see those items firsthand, right? So right from within these dashboards, you can get to that data and really have a good understanding of what's going on in the system. Historical is just that, right? It gives you an overview of how many invoices you're processing, right? By year, by month, and we can even take this down a little more and see how many invoices you're processing by week as well, right? We also do have a matrix to see who your fast approvers are and who may be suffering in silence is what we like to call it, right? Sometimes it's hard adopting a new process. That's why we do live sessions for you when you onboard. That's why we record those sessions so that it's easily enough to send a video to someone as to how to approve an invoice in PaperSave, right? That is something that we've noticed that probably within a month and a half to 3 months, all users are fast approvers because it's really just that easy, right? So what we're going to talk a little bit about next, right? We talked about the invoice processing side of the house, right? We're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about the gift processing, right? So ultimately, what PaperSave can do with these donations, right? So worth mentioning, right? Not only do we help you create batches inside of RE NXT for you, but now we also have the capabilities of helping you onboard constituents as well, right? So you're getting some of these contributions into the system, and these contributions might be for a new constituent. There's no need for you to leave the ecosystem for you to go into Blackbaud to create that constituent to then come back into PaperSave to process your gifts. Right? we can help you create constituents right from within a workflow. Sometimes maybe there's a different user that creates those constituents. Again, you saw us route invoices. We can route a gift to a user so that they can create that new constituent and then send that gift back to the gift processor so they can now enter that as part of a batch, right? So it's just a way to streamline that process if ever needed. Right? Many different ways to capture those gifts into the system, right? You saw basically the same process for the invoices, right? So we can scan them in. We can use network scanners if we want to bring those documents into the system. We can use your local scanners or even monitor and email if you wanted us to. Redaction, right? On the invoice processing side, you saw me use redaction manually, right, as part of our annotations. With our donation processing, we can actually implement automatic redaction. So as your checks are being scanned into PaperSave, we can actually make sure that your bank and routing information is redacted to make sure that your organization is kept safe, right? So this is something that can be done manually, but we can also automate it as part of the process. Indexing of your documents. This is something that applies to both the invoice processing and the Razor's Edge donation processing side of the house. You'll see that here in just a little bit, but many different ways to create what we call document types in PaperSave, allowing you to categorize the documents as they're being stored into the system, right? It could be a catch-all folder for everything that you are putting for that vendor or for that constituent, or we can get pretty detailed and create some folder structures and create some tags that we will be able to use later on to, again, make sure that our documents are kept where they need to be kept, maybe to make sure that, hey, people that have access to the invoice documentation don't have access to the vendor contract. People that have access to the planned givings document, maybe they don't have access to the actual check for the gift, right? So these are all things that we can do, making sure that we structure and index our documents properly, because we can create different folder structures in the system to store documents accurately in the system. And again, that search capability, right? So just how we can search inside of PaperSave for invoices, I'll show you how we can do that as well for the Razor's Edge side of the house. So this is where PaperSave and Razor's Edge users can share data amongst each other, right? Often, after a batch is created, maybe that batch is towards some sort of giving, and the finance team requires to create journal entries, right? In a minute here, I'll show you where the gift processor, after that batch is processed, can export all of that data out of PaperSave, all of that batch data out of PaperSave, and share that with a AP processor or finance so that they can create journal entries, or sometimes even based on the information on these Excels, import that right into Blackbaud, right? Depending on the data that you need, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. All right. So now I'm going to switch workflows here, and we're going to go into our gift processing workflow. Now, just note, just like you saw me change workflows here in my environment, right? You can have multiple workflows. It all depends on what you're doing in PaperSave, right? If you have both Razor's Edge and Financial Edge, right, we can separate security based on workflows, right? So people that are processing invoices may not need access to a gift processing workflow, or vice versa, right? So just note that while it is one system for both Razor's Edge and Financial Edge, we can get very detailed with security as to who sees what in the environment, right? So just note that it's not a free-for-all. As I mentioned, security is very, very serious when it comes to who can access what type of documents in the system, right? All right, so Processing a batch. Many different ways to get those documents into PaperSave. Again, we've seen this screen when we were talking about the invoice processes. Not a lot changes, right? It's just the ERP that is changing. We're not dealing with an invoice. We're now dealing with a check, right? So a lot of different ways depending on how you get your contributions in-house. Local scanners are multi-use. You can have a local scanner not only scan into PaperSave, but also be connected into Blackbaud so that you can scan directly into a constituent, directly into a vendor, an invoice, a deposit, or whatever the case may be. Okay. Check scanners are supported, but not very highly used because they only support checks. A lot of users on the donation side of the house, they're scanning in checks plus reply devices plus an envelopes and so on. So check scanners tend to be disqualified because of that. Drag and drop. So drag and drop is an interesting one because we do support lockbox providers, right? So a lockbox provider tends to be a service that you purchase from a bank or a third party company that processes your checks. They basically grab all of your checks, they send those to the banks, they deposit it, they scan all of that data, and then they send you this large file with a check supporting documents, the check supporting documents, and so on. So they send you this large PDF with data. PaperSave can ingest that large PDF, right? We can grab a large PDF that contains a whole stack of checks and supporting documents, and PaperSave can separate any time that we see a check in a stack, right? So you can grab a big old stack of a PDF, drag that into PaperSave, and anytime that we see that check, we're gonna make sure that we separate that for you. Now, again, not expecting you to sit by as OCR works. This is all tend to be run in the back end, right? But a couple of things to note that there's a couple of ways to gain the coding for your batches in PaperSave, right? One, batch naming convention is entirely up to you. So you can continue to use whatever batch naming convention you have, or you can use auto-generated batch naming convention, which basically just pulls the next chronological batch order number inside of NXT and gives it today's date as well. We have the capabilities of doing defaults, right? So you can have multiple folders in PaperSave where you're dragging your donations in, and each one of those folders could be configured with different variations of codes, right? Now, this is basically applying a template to a batch, right? Really only useful if you're pre-sorting your batches as you're scanning those checks into the system, right? So you're opening up the mail, you're pre-sorting things based on a fund, a pin, campaign, appeal, whatever the case may be, right? If you are, just know that we can create defaults in the system, and as soon as you bring those checks into that default, we will just go into apply whatever you tell us to, okay? There is a way for PaperSave to be a little bit more dynamic and read codes directly from the documents that are being scanned into the system, right? And I'll show you what I mean. So we can leverage OCR to read informations right from, for example, from your reply devices, right? So as your documents are coming in into our workflows, if you're scanning in the check plus a reply device, and on that reply device, let me see if I can find an example here, right here. If on that reply device, you have what is called scan lines, right? We can teach OCR to read from these scan lines, right? In essence, making us a little bit more dynamic, because instead of just reading or pulling defaults from these folders that we can create for you, we can now look at the documents that you're scanning in, look at the check for some basic information about the constituent, check date, check number, check amount. If you want to capture a memo field, we can do that as well. And then we can focus on the reply device, look for these scan lines on your reply devices to be able to dynamically code that batch, right? So each gift could potentially have different codes based on these scan lines and how they're being scanned into the system. right? So just know that it's not an and or an or. You can use default folders, and you can have PaperSave configured to also read information right from your scan lines. Okay. Redaction, right? So this is redaction happening real time. So as those checks come in, redaction is applied, right? So just know that that happens real time. Ultimately, once these checks get brought into PaperSave, again, this is your workflow. So this is where your gift processor will actually start to process that batch, right? Those documents are scanned in into the system, maybe by the front office, maybe by the mail room, or maybe by the finance team. They can scan those right into PaperSave if they like. Once they get scanned in, they get placed into the workflow after OCR is finished, and then ultimately you get that batch assigned to a gift processor. Couple of things to note here is that we can have multiple gift processors. PaperSave can scale with your organization. Most of the time it's a one or a two gift processor or type of deal, but just know that it's very easy to add another gift processor right into PaperSave. Users will ultimately be able to do that with the help of the administrator of PaperSave in the organization, right? So we'll teach you how to add other users. But in essence, maybe you are, crunch time for Christmas. We have all of these donations coming in. You can always expand and make sure that you have the help that you need to get all of these donations in on a timely manner. But ultimately, once PaperSave grabs those checks from either your scanner or from that folder, we're going to code them and put them into the workflow for you. Similar process here. Double click on that first one. You get to see what PaperSave captured as part of the coding, right? Notice here, there is an update constituent. So in the event that you want to update the address on a constituent, we're able to do that right from within the workflow, right? And I'll show you constituent creation here in just a second, but the updating of the address is something that we can do here as well. Gift processor looks at the data. If they want to apply additional gift splits, they can. If they want to do soft credit or fundraiser credit, they can do that as well. They can, again, add more pages, just like we can on the invoice side of the house. And potentially, if there's questions and you want to route this for a review, we can add another button here and a little window for you to choose a reviewer so that you can send this and have a discussion internally, which then becomes part of your audit trail, right? There's no changes needed on this particular gift. Then all you need to do is click submit, or even click on the next one to review the next one, right? It's entirely up to you how you want to do that, right? Review, make any changes as needed, click on the next one, right? Do that review. Ultimately, once you've reviewed your batch, you can select the batch. You can select multiple batches, right? It all depends how many batches you have ready to get processed. Select all the batches that you have under your ownership that you've reviewed and you're comfortable sending that into Blackbaud. You click on submit, that batch is gone, right? Now we've sent that data right into Blackbaud, and the data entry has started on the Blackbaud side of the house, right? Just like we did the data entry for the invoices. New constituents. So let's say you brought in a stack of checks right into PaperSave. PaperSave, again, it always is always going to try to OCR, but maybe this is for a new constituent and the constituent doesn't exist in the environment. You will have some fields here to fill out, enter information about the new constituent, and all you have to do is click create, right? So right from within our workflows, you will have some options to enter information about that new constituent. Once you click on create, PaperSave sends that constituent into Blackbaud. We create that constituent. And if you want us to route that gift to the gift processor so that they now can enter that as part of a batch, we can do that. We can handle that really however you like. It's just part of a workflow configuration. In this particular workflow, the vision is that the gift processor may not be the same person entering those new constituents. So we're routing any new item to a different person in the environment so that they can create the constituent and then route those gifts back to the gift processor for processing, right? It can be done however you like. Maybe the gift processor does it all, which in most cases, that is the truth path there. Okay, I'm going to refresh since we've been in here for a little bit, but I'm going to go into my Razor's Edge. I'm going to go into gifts, gift entry, and ultimately, this is what we do, right? We create a batch inside of Blackbaud for you. Batch comes in, right? And it comes in unapproved. It is something that we manage. This is a flag in PaperSave that you can turn on or off. Most clients like to have this breathing room here so that maybe they use this as a review process or as an approval process, right? In some cases, the person processing the batch may not be a Blackbaud user, right? They're just doing data entry and processing the batch. Once they submit that batch inside to Blackbaud, there may be an approver in Blackbaud that wants to look at that batch before it is approved. It's entirely up to you how you do that. That's just a vision that we've had, right? Click on that batch. You want to make any changes, you can. There's no changes needed. Then all you got to do is select and approve, right? Once you approve, you're basically telling PaperSave, hey, I am done with this batch, right? I'm going to copy that batch number because we're going to use that here in just a second. But you're just telling Blackbaud that, yes, that is a batch that I want to approve, but also PaperSave saying, hey, this gifts that you just used to create this batch, I want you to go ahead and associate those documents with every single one of these gifts, right? And that's ultimately what we do. I'll show you that here in real time. I'm going to pick on one of these constituents. I'm going to get into the record, right? We are now going to visit the actual constituent record, right? So we are at a constituent level. Again, PaperSave, native tile. So whether it is a constituent, an invoice, we have that native integration. So when you add a document to a record, all you have to do is go to that record and you'll see the document right there. Scroll down, here's your givings history. Click on that gift that we just created. Look at the information. This is part of what we just pushed through PaperSave. Again, we're now at a gift record, and here is our documentation, right? Open up that document. And again, you have the document associated right to the record as part of that supporting documentation. Left corner, you have your audit trails. You will always have that audit trail. And again, just like the invoice side, everything that you see on the screen, it is now searchable for you, right? So you want to search for this document. You want to search just for the constituent. You want to build yourself a query using all of this information that we've captured for you. You can do that as well, right? And we're actually going to dive right into that right now. I'm going to take us to our home page here, right? We're now outside of Blackbaud, right? Again, a PaperSave user doesn't have to be a Blackbaud user. You just need to be given permissions in PaperSave to be able to use some of the documents that you have added into the system, right? So it all depends on what you have access to. But we have a very capable search in PaperSave. You click on search, and you can search our systems, whether it is Financial Edge, whether it is Razor's Edge. You can search the system based on a couple of factors here. Simple just means that you're going to give me one value, for example, like an invoice number, right? You're going to give me one value, and PaperSave is going to take that one value and go back to our system and pull the document associated to that value, okay? So this could be an invoice number, a name, it could be a date, it could be a check number, for example, right? You enter a check number, maybe part of a check number that you've added as part of a gift. Open up that document. And then PaperSave will show you where we found that information, right? So you can also search again by data that is right on those documents for you. If we now go into advanced, so advanced, what it does, that allows you to build a query, right? A query using all of this metadata that we're capturing for you, either on the invoice or the Razor Edge gift side, right? So let's use this on both sides of the house. So on the finance side, invoice, we're going to click on our document folder, and then you have an option here to add your profile fields, right? This is all that you see here is just your profile fields. So all of that metadata that we're capturing for you. So you want to search invoice date, for example, is less than today. You can reuse field as many times as you like, right? Invoice date is greater than maybe the ending of last year, right? And I really only want to see documents of a certain dollar amount, for example. But think about it. You can use anything like a distribution. You can use anything of sorts to bring that data in, right? So greater than, let's say, $300. Click on search. PaperSave grabs that criteria. We take that to the database and bring in all of that documentation, right? So think about how fast that was in comparison to going into drawers or cabinets to pull documentation like that, right? Once you have the documents, select. You can share documentation. You can download that document. You can download all of that audit trail if you'd like. You can save your searches, right? Maybe you spend a good 5-10 minutes building a search. You don't want to redo that every single time. You can actually save as many searches as you like. You can save them for yourselves, or you can save them and share those with other users if you like, right? If we go back to advanced search, and we're gonna actually change and use gifts, for example, right? Same process. You have all of the data that we're capturing for you. Gift dates less than today. Gift date greater than the ending of last year, right? Search. Again, all of that data comes right out of the system for you. Select all that data. Again, we can download, share as possible, but this is something that a lot of our users like, especially when it's time for them to share, for example, a batch that they just created with the finance team, for example, right? Because now you can export data either related to a batch, related to multiple batches, right? And you can throw all of that data into Excel, right? Here, you can now share this with your team members, right? You can send this to finance and say, these are all the documentations related to a certain batch, right? They'll be able to look into PaperSave, right? You can hide columns as needed or delete columns as needed, but you can make this now your own. You'll have all of the coding that is in PaperSave, right? Plus, if that finance team wants to see a copy of the check, they're going to be able to go into column B here, click, and that'll take you right into that document right from within Excel, right? So very useful, again, to merge and to join the two departments together, right? It's time to create those journal entries. That gift team processes that batch. They're going to be able to export that batch very quickly and send that right to the finance team so that they can start to process those journal entries.